Okay, hello everybody. Happy Monday, wherever you are around the world. We are excited to be here today with Argo Visa, kind of kicking off our student visa week, sharing extra videos, content, panels just like this one throughout the week. So be sure to stay tuned on our YouTube page and our Instagram for a lot of great insights for students specifically. So today we're really excited to be joined by both Maggie and Swati, two of our former officers here at Argo. Would you guys like to introduce yourself? Maggie, how about you start?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Maggie. I'm a former U.S. visa officer. I worked for the U.S. government for over 11 years doing consular work. I worked at various postings, including Mumbai, India, Warsaw, Poland, Toronto, Canada, and in Washington, D.C. And overall, I've adjudicated or made decisions on over 25,000 U.S. visa applications, and a lot of those were student visas.
Awesome. Well, we're glad to have you here, Maggie. And Maggie knows, a lot about student visas, as do all of our officers. So we're glad to have you here. So, Swati, do you mind sharing a little bit more about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. Hi, everyone. So my name is Swati. I worked with the U.S. federal government for about 14 years within a few different agencies. I have about 7 years of specialty consular work experience. I've done close to 100,000 different kinds of adjudications in all sorts of categories. And my last assignment was in Mumbai, India. And I've been with Argo now for several years and love consulting for you.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks for being here. And we're excited to see everybody who's joined our live stream so far. So we'd love to know where you all are joining us from. So feel free to share in the comments, or even if you want to share what university you're attending. If you figured that out yet, we'd love to see that as well in the comments. So a few housekeeping things before we get started. We will have time for Q&A at the end. We kindly ask that you please just ask your question one time. If you ask it continuous times, we're going to have to skip your question and come back to the other ones, as it gets a little bit chaotic and it's hard to see everybody else's question. So please just ask your question once. If you ask it multiple times, we will not answer it, and there will be time for Q&A at the end. So stay tuned, ask your questions, and we'll start off by going into a bit of pre-selected questions for Swati and Maggie, and also going more in depth of the F-1 student visa interview process and what you guys need to know. As both of them shared, they have extensive experience working for the U.S. government and adjudicating many student visas. They've seen it all, whether you're going for a bachelor's degree directly out of high school, you're going for an associate's, you're going for a master's, second master's, PhD, both during their time with the government, but also with Argo, have helped people in all sorts of situations. So you guys are in for a treat. So let's just start a little bit like super high level as possible. So when you were on the visa line, what were you most looking for when interviewing students? I mean, what were you thinking? What were you looking for? Like, okay, that's a good answer, or okay, I feel comfortable approving this person. What's going through the mind of an officer when making a decision on a student visa applicant?
So I'll take that one. So I think they want to understand a few broad things for a student visa, right? So one is your credibility as a student. The second is your finances. And third is your intent. Okay, that's very broad, but they need to understand, does your degree make sense? Just an example of credibility. So does it make sense that did you have a bachelor's in the same kind of field? What kind of, did you have gap years? What did you do in those gap years, etc.? And your onward credibility. Then your finances, right? Everybody knows for a student visa, you've got to have enough finances to fully cover your full first year. Right. So at a minimum, they're looking at that. They need to understand, does the sponsorship make sense? Right. And also what your intent and purpose is. Are you going to study? And then what's the plan afterwards? And why would you return? So these are the main things. When an officer is able to ascertain that, and they can quickly ascertain that in just a few questions based on your responses. So that is what helps them. And that's what helps get you qualified for a student visa.
Got it. That's super helpful, especially when you break it down into those three categories. And I think an important part about what you said is that they have to understand that and that you have to explain those elements. It's not as simple as what's on paper. And that's where the interview really comes into play. I mean, Swati, do you mind sharing a little bit more about, the difference between what's on paper and then how it's translated at the interview with those three criteria?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think world over, a lot of people focus a lot on the paper, right? So even that, taking that one step further, that means your documents. So by law, for a student visa, you only need your CVIS fee receipt, you need your I-20, and you need your DS-116, your passport. Okay. Everything else is supporting evidence. It's the rest of the paper is in that percentage chance that you might get asked to see what your uncle does that he's paying for it, for example. Okay, so the DS-160 is your starting point. Everything else is supplemental. So it's most about, in that short interview, how you can explain those three things that a visa officer is concerned about. Right? You want to be able to present your case to them orally. And if you feel that you have something that is a pressing document, really want them to see, there's a way that you can kind of insert that into the language, but it's mostly about how you are presenting your case and your strengths. And that's what we help you with.
Amazing. That's super helpful. So, based on that, Maggie, I'd be curious to hear do you think there's such thing as an ideal student visa applicant? Someone on paper just instantly approved, or something that an applicant can know, okay, I'm going to be a perfect candidate for the interview?
I don't know if there's an ideal. I mean, I think that, it's such a unique, everyone's so unique and everyone has a unique situation. But I think if you're really following our guidance here, and I think Swati covered it so well, you are going to want to cover those three things. You're covering the basic credibility as a student. Secondly, you've got your finances in order. You're able to pay for your degree. And then finally, that third piece, which is overcoming 214B, which I'll delve a little bit more into. So I think that can look differently for each person. So I don't know that there's really like one sort of ideal type, but if you're covering those three items, then I think you're going to be in a really good position to demonstrate that you are qualified for the visa. So of those three, though, in terms of like an ideal student visa applicant, I do want to go into a little bit more about overcoming 214B, because that is so important here. So the F-1 student visa is subject to something called 214B, which is basically the presumption that the applicant is an intending immigrant to America. And so if you have that presumption, you have to overcome it. You have to demonstrate during that short interview with the visa officer why you overcome 214B, why you are not an intending immigrant, why you do actually have this residence abroad in your home country that you do not intend to abandon. And basically, after you finish your studies, what's going to bring you back to your home country? What do you have waiting for you? Maybe it's family, maybe it's job or career prospects, whatever it is, you have something that's going to bring you back. And so I think if we're talking about, an ideal student visa applicant, that is going to be somebody who can clearly demonstrate that they overcome 214B, that they are going to return back to their home country. They're going to use their visa appropriately. And, that's really what the visa officer wants to hear from you.
Awesome. I think that's super helpful. And just to kind of summarize something I think important that you said, Maggie, that we often get a misconception about, it's not just about having maybe a specific GPA or a specific school or a specific sponsor that's the right answer. It's about those three criteria and how you take your case and relate it to those three criteria. I mean, do either of you have any more thoughts on that idea of, there's not just one sponsor or one school that's correct for the visa interview?
Yeah, I have some thoughts here. So I think students get really hung up on the ranking. They are more worried about the ranking of that particular university than the officer is at all, honestly. Okay, so there's generally, obviously, the top tier universities and the Ivy Leagues, right? Then there's everything in between, and there's community colleges too. So that everything in between, the officer is not going to know every single university and college. For them, the ranking doesn't matter as much. What matters to the officer is, why is this university the right fit for you? Like, if you applied to a few universities, you got into a couple of them, what distinguishes this one for you? That's what they need to understand in that interview, not your rote answer that sounds really nice. Okay, but that it's just the best ranked university and education in the United States is fantastic, and I'll have great career prospects when I come back. I mean, that's what the officer otherwise hears, right? When you're being really generic. So you've got to personalize it. So just you have to remember, what are the personalized reasons you want to go to that university beyond the ranking? Is there something about, is there a scholarship element here? Is there a hands-on AI lab that's particularly of interest to you? Is it the internship, CPT opportunities, etc.? These are the things that you need to focus on. So I think when a visa applicant does that, when a student recognizes that, that helps them tremendously in becoming like an ideal applicant for the visa officer, when they're able to explain their personalized reasons for going to this program or this university.
Amazing. Yeah, that's super helpful, I think, to illustrate beyond just where applicants sometimes get stuck when preparing for the interview. So along the lines of personal situations and how it's going to be different for everybody, I mean, even just in this session so far, we have people joining us from Myanmar, from Ghana, from Nigeria, from all over. So we're really glad you're here. What would you guys say about how an interview may vary from country to country for a student?
Yeah, I can take this one. So, thinking about the basic student visa interview, there's going to be some questions that are similar, I think, around the world. Those sort of basic questions. Why do you want to study in the United States? Why did you choose this college? Tell me about your degree. Tell me about your finances, etc. I think sometimes where there might be some areas of variation are, if you come from a country where the socioeconomic conditions are more challenging, and that can be a little bit more challenging for you to explain what sort of job you're going to have afterwards, that kind of thing. So you might want to think about that. But I think overall, a lot of the questions, the themes are broadly similar that they're asking about. So I think that there's ways that everyone can prepare for these types of questions and really prepare to demonstrate what their qualifications are for the visa and how they overcome that all important 214B.
Awesome. That is helpful to have your thoughts. So going back to the university, we actually had a question about this as well. I know we touched on it a little, but I think this is kind of along the same lines. I mean, how much does the reputation and the ranking of the university matter? But even beyond this, we get a lot of questions of someone coming to us and say, okay, how is this university? How is that university? I think we should continue to talk about this topic a little bit more, just because we have still gotten questions in this thread. I mean, how much really does the university matter, and how should an applicant think about that during their preparation process?
And Maggie, why don't you add your thoughts? I've already given some of mine so that they can get another perspective, and I'll chime in if there's something else too.
Absolutely. So I think this is an interesting question, because I think it does and it doesn't matter. And I'll kind of explain, I'll delve into that a little bit more. I think that, on first, when the visa officer first looks at your application and they speak to you, they may have some preconceived notions about your college or university. So if you're going, like Swati was saying, to the Ivy League, then it's pretty instantly recognizable, why you'd want to go to a college like that. But I think also it really does matter what your personal reasons are for going to that college and how you're able to communicate that to the visa officer. Like, I chose this college. It's a smaller one. It's private. It's public, whatever it is. It's a community college. It's the right one for me because of X, Y, and Z. And so I think that really thinking about it in that personal way, one of the things that I was always told when I worked at the American consulate in Mumbai, I was working there for 2 years doing visas day in, day out. And we had so many people to interview every single day, 120, 130 applications a day. I mean, Swati remembers it's a visa mill. We were just so busy. And, one of the things that the managers told us was, they said, we're not adjudicating the school, the college, we're adjudicating the applicant. And so that was really something for us to think about, because that was true. We were supposed to be adjudicating the applicant and their merits in terms of their qualifications for the visa, and we were not adjudicating the school itself. And so while, your choice of school can certainly factor in because it tells the visa officer something about you, that's not going to be the whole story. And of course, you yourself, you have to tell your own story. You have to demonstrate your qualifications and why you chose this university. So it matters, to answer the question, it matters somewhat, but I think it matters more how you tell your story to the visa officer and how you demonstrate your qualifications.
Yeah, I think that's a really good anecdote from your time of how it tells something about you. And a lot of the interview and what we share at Argo is just about how you tell your story, how you communicate beyond just what's on paper for the visa officer. And as many challenges as there are with the interview format, it can be an opportunity for you to kind of tell your story and illustrate something beyond just what's on paper for the officer. Just a reminder to everybody, if you didn't join us at the beginning, please only ask your question one time. If you ask it multiple times, we're not going to be able to answer your question because it's not fair to everybody else. So please just ask your question one time. So also to kind of do a flip-flop and back to the 214B conversation, Maggie, you had spoken a little bit about the importance of overcoming 214B. Why it's so challenging. There's the whatever you have the home country ties and how kind of elusive it is and mysterious of what that actually means to people. I mean, Swati, what do you think about how a student can overcome 214B or what they should be thinking about within their interview?
Okay, so for an F-1, everybody's got that presumption. You're an intending immigrant, right? So when you get that denial letter, if you've been denied before, it's pretty broad. It's pretty generic. You're never going to know exactly why you got denied. Okay, we can help you figure that out when we understand your case or, your previous history, etc. But that's the baseline that the officer is already looking at you from. So on top of that, they're going to see the possible profile weaknesses. And this is all happening pretty quick. Okay. So your goal is to always focus on what are the things now that you know, right? Maggie's told you, and I've told you too, the three main things that a visa officer is concerned with for student visa: your credibility, your finances, your intact, right? So if you're addressing your answers each time that provides clarity to the visa officer on those items in specific ways, that is how you help yourself overcome, because they're not expecting a student to necessarily own their own house, okay, or even have a car for that matter. It's not about necessarily a tangible thing. It's about your other ties. What are your home ties? So home ties means even family ties. So many times, and I know all of us Argo officers see it so many times, a lot of categories, and you see this a lot with students too, but you get asked a family question and you're very nervous about it because you're not sure, do I admit that I have this family or do I not? Okay, yes, you always want to be honest. You got to fill out that form correctly, etc. But there's a way to present that. Most people make the mistake of they just say, yeah, I've got this H-1B brother there and a U.S. citizen uncle and etc. And then they just leave it. But they don't add that they are living with their younger brother and their parents, and dad does this and mom does that, etc. Okay, and that their extended family is between two states, for example. So that's how you again help yourself overcome that 214B. These are things that are strengths for your profile that help the visa officer understand that, okay, why are they not an intending immigrant? It's because they have X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, and I think the family thing you mentioned is super prevalent to what we often get questions about, and it's not always as simple as family is good or bad or yes or no. First off, like Swati said, always be truthful, but also if you're really trying to figure out, okay, how do I talk about this family situation in a way that's going to make sense to the officer, in the way that is strengthening my case, that's really what our Argo officers are here to help you with, and that's where the personalized one-on-one consultation really can make a difference in helping you figure out, okay, how do I use the time as effectively as possible during the interview too, because you don't always have a lot of time. The officer may cut you off. There's limited components here to consider. You also brought up another great point, Swati, about you don't have to own a house, all those things, because we often get questions from students. Maybe they're going right from high school to university and they're saying, okay, I don't have many home country ties. I'm 18 years old. I don't have a house. I don't have a car. I don't have a job. This is kind of the path they're going down, and they feel like there's an extra burden on proving those home country ties. So I think you brought up a good point that it doesn't have to just be those tangible assets. Maggie, do you have anything else to add about the home country ties or 214B that we haven't yet really covered?
Yeah, so on the 214B, so I think the other kind of flip side of it, you've got the sort of overcoming that presumption of being an immigrant, but also the other part of it is that you need to convince the officer so that they don't have any doubts that you are going to use this visa appropriately. So that's kind of another way to look at it. It's kind of the flip side of 214B that I think people sometimes don't quite realize, that during your interaction, during this short visa interview, you are, through your demeanor, through your confidence, through what you're saying, you are convincing the officer that, yes, I'm going to go to the US, I'm going to use my F-1 student visa appropriately, afterwards, I'm going to return to my home country, et cetera. So, you're giving that impression through the things that you're saying and the way that you're carrying yourself. And so I think that that's another thing to think about when you're young, you're a student, maybe you've just finished high school or college or whatever, and maybe you don't have a lot of ties to your home country, but through the things that you're saying and the way that you're answering the questions, you are convincing them that you're going to use this visa in the right way and you're going to follow those rules. And so I think that's another thing that you can really use in a positive way during the interview. And that's another thing that, like Davis was saying, we can help you with at Argo. If you decide to do a consultation with one of our team, we have many I think over a dozen, 15 or so former U.S. visa officers, and all of us have various specialties and also this general body of knowledge. But we can help you really personalize your preparation so that you're ready to tackle these questions and to really feel confident on the day of your visa interview that you can demonstrate your qualifications and that you're going to use the visa appropriately.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing both of your perspectives on 214B. So again, we're focusing a lot on some of the top questions we get at Argo about the F-1 visa interview for students, what they're kind of facing. The other thing we often hear about is people reaching out and saying, is this a red flag? Can I do this? Is this okay? And it's often not as simple of just saying, okay, red flag or not. Sometimes we call things more yellow flags or hurdles you have to overcome. And it's not as black and white, it's just red flag or not. What do you guys think are some hurdles that F-1 students often need to overcome at their visa interview?
So I don't think of it. Yes, I don't think of it. And I don't think I ever thought of it in the visa line as a red flag. So I think of it as the law says that you don't qualify, right? These are the things I need to understand that you qualify for F-1 visa, because I have to adjudicate and justify forever in a record that my name, why, like Maggie was saying, you're going to use this visa correctly. Right. So I'm looking at from the perspective of that. What are the profile weaknesses? Okay. And the presumption is you don't qualify. What are the profile weaknesses? And the officer is going to assume those profile weaknesses unless in the interview, when they're giving you the opportunity of the one question or the 3 questions or the 5 questions, okay, that you're always responding to them in a way that is counterbalancing those weaknesses, right? Those and proving and with your body language and with the confidence, etc. That Maggie was also saying, this is so important in such a short amount of time. How can you convince that visa officer of your credibility as a student and that you're going to use this visa correctly and come back? So that's where in those consultations we go into a deep dive about your own profile, because everybody's case is different. So we figure out, well, why does this make sense for you? What were your reasons to go to this university? And how did you figure that out? And why is your uncle paying? And how do you help that visa officer understand that your uncle's paying and it makes sense? Okay, so this is how you help counterbalance the weaknesses that the visa officer is already seeing, whether it's from your DS-160, whether it's just previous denials or you can't communicate, but there's a way to present your strengths. So that's what we really help you with, especially through mocks and feedback.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to say that when you said that when you were a visa officer, you never saw a case and you're just thinking red flag, red flag, red flag, but that's not really a way that the officers think, but it is more about the assumption that they don't qualify and kind of overcoming that throughout the interview, more so than just red flag as the way of thinking. So I think that is just helpful to debunk that myth there. Maggie, anything else you think about, overcoming hurdles at the F-1 interview?
Absolutely. So one of the big hurdles that I think we hear a lot about are previous visa refusals. And this is, of course, something that is a hurdle to overcome, because if you have been refused a visa before and you're going back to reapply, then you have to think about a strategy. You have to think about how am I going to present myself in a way that makes this new visa officer make a different decision about me. So that's a hurdle that you need to think about. And I think that's one of the things that we really specialize at Argo, is helping people to think about, sort of do that deep dive that Swati was talking about, what happened in your previous visa interview. How did you come across? What were the questions? How did you answer them? And then let's think about how we can sort of, flip the script, so to speak, and think about how are you going to present yourself in a more positive way, or how are you going to present that information that they didn't hear about before, or maybe the officer didn't understand this about your profile. Well, let's help them understand that. So I think that's something that you really have to think about is if you've been previously refused for 214B for in the past, then how are you going to change that narrative the next time around? Because if you go in with the same sort of strategy that you're just going to go in and say the same things, then it will likely be the same answer. So you have to really think about what's different this time around, and how can you tell that to the visa officer, help them understand you better.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And just to kind of highlight some of our other events this week, as on Wednesday, we're going to be doing a session very focused on refusals, talking more and more in depth on how to go to the F-1 interview if you have a prior refusal, and how to more in depth avoid a refusal. So we'll be touching on that more on Wednesday. So be sure to stay tuned for that, because we know it's a very popular topic that people want to know more about, especially as the student visa refusal rate has steadily increased over the years. More and more students are going to the F-1 interview with a prior refusal already kind of on their visa record. So we have a lot of great questions. So thank you everybody for asking them and for chiming in. We're going to cover one more topic before we get into the questions, which is funding and sponsors. We get questions about this all the time of people saying, okay, is it okay? Kind of back to the same theme of, okay, is it okay if this person is my sponsor, or is that bad? How will the officer see this? If I change my sponsor, will I get approved this time? The balance between funding, loans, all those things. And something about the sponsors, you can't change this factor in your case. And this is where the interview portion comes into play of just how you present this to the officer, how you make your situation make sense to the officer in a clear way, and overcome 214B. What kind of strategies would you give students that are thinking about how they're going to discuss their sponsor or their funding sources at the visa interview?
Sure, I'll start with this one. So I think, so you have to think of the sponsorship question as a broad in a broad way. Okay. So you don't wait for a specific question. Okay. The question can come, who's going to sponsor your education? How much is your tuition and living expenses? Who's going to fund your degree? How will you support yourself in the United States? Do you have a scholarship? Have you taken out a loan? I've asked about 7 questions, and they're all asking about the financial factor. Okay, so you can't wait for a specifically worded question. As soon as you hear something that's asking you about the money, all right, your goal is to give a comprehensive understanding of those finances. Okay, so in the Davison's example, right? So if the family member is going to pay, how do I make it make sense? So I'll take the example of the uncle's going to pay, right? So because we get this a lot, I think, as for students, that some family member is going to pay. So you need to make it understandable. Why is the uncle paying? What does he do that he's going to pay? So it it has to be specific, right? So you want to be able to explain that in one kind of comprehensive thing. If you're asked about it, you're also talking about your tuition and your fees and how much it's going to cost and who's paying. So just a totally made up hypothetical here, it would be something like this. It's going to cost me $50,000 per annum, all inclusive, which my uncle's sponsoring because he is a U.S. citizen that has his own, real estate business where he earns $500,000 a year. My parents do this, but and they support me into the day to day. In fact, I live with them, but etc. So this is how it kind of goes. Okay, it has to make sense. Why are your uncle paying and not your parents? And it could be that your parents' financial situation is not the same as somebody else that's paying, and that's fine, but it has to make sense, right? It could now, in terms of going further, if you have a scholarship or loan or anything, so many times I see that people leave out the fact that they've received a scholarship. That's like one of your biggest strengths, right? Or they leave out that they've got a tuition waiver, for example. So if you have some sort of extra thing like that, you want to try to put that in earlier. So it's going to cost me $50,000 a year, but I've received a $20,000 stipend because I'm getting this TA assistantship. And on top of that, the remaining XYZ is going to come from my dad, who does this, and the rest from my brother, who's on his H-1B, etc. So this is what I mean. You want to elaborate fully in a way that then leaves the officer satisfied in just one funding question versus them having to repeatedly ask. And they're not likely going to see those documents, but you take everything with you that supports why is your uncle paying, or your H-1B brother, for example, in the case that they ask you for it.
Thank you for that. And the example is very helpful too. And I think what you illustrated that's super important for students to remember, and you said it at the beginning, is you can't wait for a specifically worded question from the officer for how you're going to highlight your case. We really advocate at Argo for having a proactive strategy, and this is exactly what you would get in a consultation. If you work with Swati, Maggie, one of our other officers, they would help you break down your case, figure out what your top highlights are, your top hurdles are, so that when you get to the interview, you're not forgetting something like the scholarship. You might not realize how big a certain component of your case is in terms of being a highlight for you or for being a hurdle. And so they'll really help you make sure you're not losing the opportunity at the interview to proactively share the most important things in your case that are going to really help you stand out positively to the officer. So sometimes, an applicant may not know what is going to make the biggest impact for the positive. And you do miss out on describing somebody like your scholarship if that's going to be a big highlight for you. So that's something that we can really help you with accordingly. Maggie, do you have anything else to add about sponsors, financials, that sort of topic before we get into the chat?
Yeah, just a little bit more. I wanted to just echo what Swati was saying about scholarships, because I think that's so true that people sort of forget to share them. So that's so important. Scholarships, grants, etc. Definitely cover that. Definitely tell the officer that's such positive information. It's free money that you're getting from a U.S. university. So absolutely share that. Ditto. Also, if you're doing a PhD and it's fully funded, that's so important to share. That's that should be the very first thing, really, almost out of your mouth. If you're doing a fully funded PhD, you have to share that info. The other thing is that I love to tell, my clients that, this is also a great opportunity to talk about, what you might be doing in the future, like after your studies. So especially if you're taking out a loan and then you're going to use this degree to maybe get yourself a better job, a better paying job. Maybe you'll get a promotion when you return back home, and maybe the company you're working for wants to promote you once you do this degree from America, something like that. That's a great way to incorporate that information and make sure that you share that with the visa officer. So, sometimes these questions, they'll ask you one question about finances, or, just a little something about how are you going to cover the cost of your education, who's paying, et cetera. But from that, you can actually share quite a lot about yourself and a lot of really positive information. So think about how you can incorporate all this. And again, if you need some help with strategy, don't hesitate to contact us at Argo. We'd be happy to help you come up with that comprehensive strategy for tackling the visa interview.
Yeah, and I think you just shared a really important thing that often our officers help applicants with, which is how to utilize, a given question or topic to continue to bring up your highlights and kind of use that to illustrate why you'll overcome 214B. So with that, want to get into some of the questions, and I think we have a perfect one related to what we're discussing right now, which is about loans. We touched a little on scholarships. Maggie, you just briefly mentioned loans, but how does that impact a visa applicant at their interview? What is an officer kind of thinking if they see a really large loan that a student has when they're adjudicating that visa?
Well, I'll just jump in since I just mentioned loans. I don't know that it necessarily decreases it. I think that it will bring up questions for the visa officer. I think that they will think, well, gosh, you're taking out this really, really big loan, and they may think, well, how are you going to pay this back? How is that possible? And of course, taking into account the socioeconomic conditions of the country that you're coming from, the type of job market it is, just sometimes the finances might not add up for the officer. So you have to help them understand how it makes sense for you and your family to take out this loan. So if this is making sense for you, maybe your parents are helping you with the loan, maybe you yourself are, maybe you're, a mid-career student who's taking some time out to do an MBA or something, and you're taking that loan, and this makes sense for you because you'll be getting a higher paying job afterwards. These are the things you have to tell the officer about. You have to really tell them your personal circumstances. So I think on the face of it, a loan is something that a lot of people will use for higher education. I know I myself did, a lot of my friends and family, a lot of people will take out loans for various stages of their education. But I think you have to really help the officer make sense of why this makes sense for you to take this loan and how you will be able to pay it off in the future.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and that it's not just about the loan, as that many people get loans to go study, but kind of the secondary part of how you'll pay it off. So I think that's very helpful. Kind of another great question is about why visa officers may cut someone off when they're talking. And I think one thing both of you mentioned earlier from your experience in Mumbai is just how busy officers are. We work with many applicants who have interviews in extremely busy locations like India or China or Brazil. Do you mind adding a little bit more of why might an officer cut off an applicant, and even more kind of illustrating what the life of a visa officer is like when they're making visa decisions?
Sure, I'd be happy to jump in here. So I think there's about 3 reasons a visa officer cuts somebody off. So one is that you are just responding really to the point. Okay, or something really obvious. So why do you want to go to the US? To do my master's. All right, so that's already obvious. You're already there for a student visa. They already have your I-20. They can even tell what your master's is, right? So it's kind of losing the opportunity. And they have to ask you something on the same kind of topic. So they'll usually go downhill from there. They may not ask you something on the same topic. The second reason, I think, is because you're being too broad, generic, memorized, rehearsed, robotic, coached, etc. So, and I gave an example earlier in this webinar of what it kind of sounds like. So, and you have to remember, so going into the experience, yes, Mackie's absolutely right. I remember clocking over 150 interviews a day sometimes and working on Saturdays and stuff. Mumbai is a proper mill. So it is really tiring. So for a visa officer, and I'm going to touch on this in a light way. So I know a lot of applicants think it's the mood of the officer, right? So if you could just empathize here, a visa officer doing 100-something interviews a day, if they're consistently hearing, I would like to go to America because it's the best place to study for my higher education opportunities. And when I come back, I will get a good paying job in my home country. Okay, if they hear that 100 times a day, that doesn't help them in any sort of way. They cannot approve you even if they want to. There's no quota system, but they can't justify why they can approve you. So it would get frustrating. So that is kind of just a part of the experience. It then can be very exhausting. So that's why it's so important that you have to think of yourself as, how can I help. I mean, you almost have to think of it like, what can I do that makes this visa officer's job easier? Okay, if you can really nail that down in the way you answer, you can get approved in like 2 questions, having no documents seen. So it's really how you can help yourself present that and your strengths in such a way that the officer needs. That's what we help you fine tune, really.
Awesome. Yeah, that's super helpful to illustrate, yeah, certain things that may lead the officer to cut you off, and also just the general kind of
Yeah.
experience of being an officer. So again,
Yeah,
kind
I
of
think I
looking
have a
behind
couple
the
of
window.
points. Just
Oh,
a
go
couple
ahead.
other points on that. Yeah. So the other thing is that so you don't want to waste your opportunity, your few seconds in repeating. This is one of the things that will definitely answer that question. You don't want to repeat the question in a statement format. It serves you no purpose and it serves the visa officer no purpose. Okay. So you don't need to be yes, sir, yes, ma'am, every single time. Okay. And you don't need to, well, the reason I think that I got denied officer is because last time I was really nervous and I was not able to explain the change in my circumstances. So they've used that question to not actually say anything about their profile. The visa officer is very quickly going to cut you off. Okay, so that's because you're just not saying anything specific to yourself, or you're stating the obvious, or you're repeating the question in a statement format and then still not saying anything. Your goal is to go straight to your points and your strengths, really.
Amazing. Yeah, that's super helpful. Anything else to add, Maggie, on that question?
Just something briefly about, that kind of, it's similar to what Swati was saying, but the sort of the various, it's very tedious to work on the visa line, and you're there all day. You're speaking to 130, 140, 150 visa applicants a day, and I think that if you as a visa applicant can kind of stand out from the crowd a bit and not say the same generic thing that everyone else is saying. And so what I tell people is, show some passion for your subject that you're studying, or show a bit of personality. Kind of be yourself, be your authentic self. If
Mm-hmm.
you're really excited to study in America, let that show to the visa officer. Why are you excited? Are you excited about this university? Why are you excited about studying this topic? Why? Just kind of let that personality, let that passion show through. And I think that really, first of all, it comes across really well to the visa officer, but I think also it kind of breaks up that monotony of hearing the same generic thing from 100 student visa applicants every day. And I think that can really be very positive for you if you do it in the right way. So again, something to think about there.
I couldn't agree more, Maggie. Absolutely. Yeah, be passionate about it. Show it, let it show. Absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah, I think, two things you guys both touched on was being specific and detailed, and then also authentic. And so kind of having both of those is helpful for standing out in the right way. So kind of, looking behind the window, I don't know if this is a long answer much, but what are these officers typing during the interview? Why are they on their computers? What are they actually doing?
Okay, so we have to justify every single approval or every single denial or every single administrative processing, every single action that's taken on a case. It has to be justified, right? So, and that's a permanent record. That's always going to be there. So they have to type the notes, whether that's for the approval, the reasons that they're giving you the approval, or the reasons that they're giving you the denial. So that's what they're typing. And yes, they are multitasking. It's all happening, depending on the country you're doing it in. You may have more time or not, but otherwise it's still pretty fast. They're going to be looking at your DS-160, the computer, the previous notes, if any, your I-20, your CMC receipt, asking you questions all at the same time and analyzing everything you're saying, and looking at your body language, your confidence. All of this is happening rapidly, right? So they're also quickly typing. I mean, we become experts at just multitasking, really, as visa officers, right? So they're typing their justification because the consular officers, the managers can look at that. It's a permanent record forever. If the visa applicant abused that visa, there could be repercussions for the visa officer too. So these are the notes that they need to type.
Yeah, and I think you brought up one really important thing at the end that applicants may not realize is that, yeah, it is the record. One is permanent, and two, that the officer is going to have to be responsible for that decision. So they have a lot of pressure on them for each individual interview, which is why they're oftentimes kind of inclined to refuse a visa in some cases. So again, peeling back the curtain, are rejections and approvals already decided? Does an officer make a decision before the interview even starts? Are there quotas? We get this question a lot, so kind of adding that on. I mean, what do you guys think about this topic?
I'll jump in here. So rejections and approvals are not already decided. This is not predetermined. I'm always happy to really, to bust this myth, because there are no quotas. There's no set number per day that an officer has to approve, has to reject. Absolutely not. It is up to that individual officer, based on their decisions. So, things are not decided when you get up to the window. The visa officer will have reviewed your DS-160 and they'll have a few ideas in their mind about what they're going to ask you, but they have not made up their mind yet. They have to ask you, usually at least 1, 2, or 3 questions before they make that decision. So it's not already decided. You absolutely have a chance to prove yourself. Sometimes it is a very short opportunity because the visa interviews are very short, generally, 2 to 3 minutes at the most. But yeah, happy to bust that myth. These are not predetermined, and the officer has not made a decision about you ahead of time. They will have to ask you a few questions and get some more information before they make that decision.
Awesome. Anything else to add, Swati?
Yeah, I'll give kind of an anecdote. So even you have to understand there's also internally. So when you have a mission that has a lot of officers, right? Even weekly or bi-weekly, they're still having meetings internally. Is everybody on the same page? What are the kinds of cases that we're seeing? Officers may get assigned a certain portfolio. I had an F-1, J-1, M-1 portfolio. Somebody might have this. So we may be on top of, these are the trends. This is what we need to be looking out for. This is what, we're seeing, etc. So there are internal things that are happening. The consular managers are responsible for reviewing to make sure that, is this kind of, what's the pulse here? So usually I've seen before in these such meetings that if an officer is on an extreme end, and there is definitely no quota, I've never heard of it. It doesn't exist. In fact, we used to make jokes that, like, okay, I think applicants think that we are going to say that everybody that's wearing red today gets a visa, right? So because you guys think it's that random, but it's not. So there is no quota there. But internally, going back to staff meetings and stuff, the officers will also, the managers will check that, okay, well, Swati, you seem to be on, everybody's kind of at the 80% approval rate this week on student visas and stuff, and you're at the 20% approval rate. What's going on? So there is a kind of, yes, the officer has to make that decision, but there is kind of some sort of check, and you can go to another colleague and understand that kind of stuff. So there are, there are times where they're making sure that everybody's kind of in line and understanding that this is where we are, this is what we're seeing, these are the trends, this is how we apply the policies or the changes, etc. If that helps.
Yeah, both those answers were very helpful in illustrating us a little bit more on how the process works. We've got a handful of questions from people about study gaps. This is just one of them. It's going to be hard to in regards to study gaps and how that impacts a student at the interview.
Oh, is everybody still there? It kind of cut out a little bit.
Yeah, I lost you too.
Oh no,
the sound sort of cut out.
It might be on my side. Sorry, everybody. So
it's okay. I can hear both of you now.
You can hear? Okay.
Yeah.
What should a student that has a study gap consider? We had a handful of questions about this. This is just one of them, but how will this impact their interview?
I can jump in on this one. So if you have a study gap, it's important to think about what were you doing during that time? Were you working? Were you attending to personal matters, et cetera? And being truthful about that. Um, it's not generally a good idea to, delve too much into personal issues. If there's been, family issues, medical issues, et cetera, the visa officer doesn't need to know about all the nitty gritty details of things. But if there have been some personal circumstances you've been dealing with, I think it's okay to mention that briefly, and then also to get back on track with, okay, this is why I'm qualified for this student visa because of X, Y, and Z. So I would just say don't dwell on any difficulties that you've had, because I think that can come off in a negative way to the officer, even if you've overcome them, and everybody's had things in their life that they've had to overcome. But I think this is not the right format to sort of share every single detail about what you've been through. But if you do have a time in your life that you need to explain, I looked after this family member who was ill, and then after that, I'm committed to getting back to my studies because of X, Y, and Z. Something like that is fine. So I think you have to, be natural about it, but also don't sort of dwell on any sort of difficulties or gaps that you have too much.
Awesome. Anything else to add?
Yeah, it should make sense, right? Yeah, I totally agree. Don't dwell on the really personal things, go into the details, but it should make sense. So if the gap helps you in some way, and there are some times where it does, like if a person has a bachelor's and they're going for an MBA, so they may have gotten 2 to 3 to 4 years of work experience. That's where then you want to use that to help you. So it's just because you have a gap that it's not automatically negative, right? You have to think of that too.
Awesome. And I think this goes a little bit back to the last question, but it's interesting. And so this person's asking how are visas approved on a university level? Does visa officers know about approvals and refusals as they relate to a certain university? And like, is there any consideration, okay, if all the students from one school get rejected or approved, like how does that work? Are the officers looking at it on a university level? What do you guys think about this, kind of going back to some of the topics before on quotas, but also about universities?
Annie, do you want to take this first? I have some thoughts too, but
sure. I'll jump in. So to answer this question, strictly speaking, there are not a set number of visas to be approved for any particular one university. That's not the way the decisions are made, and the visa officer is not considering it in that way. So basically to say that, University X, all of the visas could be approved if those individual applicants are approvable and they're qualified, or all of them could be denied if all of those individuals are found to be not qualified. So, with that said, there are some universities that, are known for having low graduation rates, people who drop out, who have various difficulties. And so that, sometimes the visa officers will be aware of certain universities that have those difficulties. So that can factor in. But like I was saying before, the visa officer themselves, they are not adjudicating a particular university. They're adjudicating the actual visa applicant. So you yourself are having to demonstrate your qualifications and why you're qualified for the visa.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Oh no, is Swati? Okay, there. Swati,
I'm here.
You're going to add about that question?
Yeah, let me just get can you just repeat the question again?
Yeah, how are visas approved on a university level? Do the visa officers know how many more visas are to be issued for a particular intake for a particular university?
Sure, absolutely agree with everything that Maggie said. The other information I would add here is that sometimes what happens is that a lot of students will go to agents or educational institutions or agents that help them with the whole process of securing I-20s and getting in and et cetera. So partly you do see that where if that particular university is heavily recruiting in your country, then what it ends up translating to is then maybe the agents are also telling you, well, this is a good university and other universities in this class are like this. Where the officer ends up seeing it is that maybe in that particular student visa season, all of a sudden we're hearing a lot more that people are going to University of XYZ. So then, then you'll just be alert. So that's where you want to understand that why are we seeing more of this, et cetera. So is it still, then it'll boil down to, well, is this person a genuine student? Why did they choose this university or not? Okay, so that's where it comes back to, you have to be able to explain. So it can't just be, well, I put it off to my agent and they said that these are, my manageable universities based on my funding, et cetera. And then I just apply. So that's not something that a credible student would do. So if you do use some other means to be able to secure a spot, you still have to why are you still going to go there? Why are you still going to spend the money to go there? Why are you still going to study a master's in XYZ at that university? Like, why does it still matter? How is it going to change your life? This is where you want to come back and connect it again, as Maggie was saying as well. So just wanted to add.
Oh, I think you're on mute, Davis.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So thank you both for those questions. We're kind of gearing up towards the end of the session. So we're just going to have one more question to answer. But as a reminder, we're going to be doing more webinars throughout this week in particular. So if your question did not get answered, come back to some of our other webinars for those Q&A sessions. Tomorrow we'll be having the former director of USCIS join us to share a bit more about some current events with the F-1 visas. We'll be doing another webinar on Wednesday focused on refusals, and we're going to have a workshop later this week. We're going to be talking about, we're going to have a DS-160 workshop. So if you have questions about what's happening this week, definitely send us an email at hello@argovisa.com. If you have a burning question that did not get answered and you don't want to wait for the next Q&A, you can also email us at hello@argovisa.com. and somebody will answer your question and we'll be here for you. If you would love to have a consultation with someone on our team, visit www.argovisa.com. You can book a consultation. If you specifically want to request Maggie or Swati, definitely send us an email. Let us know before you book and we'll help arrange that. But also we have, as Maggie noted earlier, just over 15 wonderful former officers with various specialties, time availability, all those things to help all of you get ready for your interview. So last question I want to touch on is about travel history. We had a few questions about people saying, okay, what does it mean if I don't have travel history? If I have a prior B1, B2, is that going to help? What do you guys think about travel history for an F-1 visa applicant? How much does that help or hurt you at the interview, whether you have extensive travel history or if you don't have any?
Swati, do you want to jump in on this one?
Sure, I'll take it. Yeah, sure. So I think, the more travel history you have, the better in general, just for your profile, no matter what kind of visa category you're really applying for. So yes, if you're applying for an F-1 and you already have a B1, B2 and you've used it well, then that bodes well for you. So travel history can also be indicative of other things for a visa officer. That could mean that your family may have financial stability, that you are able to do your international vacation once a year, etc. That means you're also not staying in a foreign country and you're coming back. So these are indirect kinds of things that help when you have good positive travel history.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that really covers it. Unless Maggie, do you have anything else to add about travel history?
No, I think you covered it all.
Awesome. Well, as much as we'd love to get through all these questions, there's only so much time in the day. We have to get back to consultations and probably responding to all of your emails with follow-up questions. So we will be here to help. We're so grateful to both Maggie and Swati for joining us today, sharing some of their insights and knowledge. We wish you luck. I think I saw one applicant who said their interview is tomorrow. So best of luck to you and to everybody else this student visa season. Like I said, Argo, our team, all of us here are passionate about helping students and giving you guys the resources and tools you need to succeed, whether that be through our content or through a consultation or also our DS-160 service. So if you have questions about our services, how you can get more engaged with us, definitely send us an email at hello@argovisa.com. And thanks again for joining. We hope to see more of you throughout the week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.